Okay, and so what I wanted to do this morning for a quick demonstration is tie in our front end web forms with a kind of like a full stack. And when I mean full stack, I'm talking about the front end HTML that you see, maybe some front end JavaScript that you see, as well as what you could call the back end. Now, the back end really consists of two layers, what you would call the application logic and the database logic. So there's really three tiers that are often referred to when you're saying full stack. Full stack is the front end, it's the application tier, which is oftentimes server logic and a web server, and a database tier. Okay. And so I kind of have been working in my afternoon class, and we've been putting together this little project about pet adoption. And the concept is that you can adopt pets through this website. And I right now I've got a home page that's pretty empty. Now there's some application logic that we've kind of baked into this website. So there's a middle tier actually filled out here, and you can kind of see we've got this is actually JavaScript that we have coded, and we have it so that you can adopt new pets and you can get a list of pets, and we've really built out the middle tier. And we've built out the back end, but we haven't built the front end. So I thought, well, this is great, because in my afternoon class, we're building out the back end. And in my morning class, I can tie in the front end to it. And so I thought I'd kind of like, okay, well, maybe just the most simple thing that I could do is make like an email registration form for my morning class. It's like, hey, if you're interested in adopting a pet, let's start with your email. And I'll just start with a very simple form. Give me your email, click submit, and save it to a database. And that's kind of the objective here. Now, the database that we are working with is a cloud-based database. Maybe you've heard of something called Mongo Database, MongoDB. I know we even in this class, for my current students, I kind of did a little Mongo database video that I had you guys watch just to kind of begin to get you familiar with it. But it's a cloud-based database. So you can kind of see here that we're storing pet information in the cloud in this database. Well, I made this email table, if you will, or this email collection. And ultimately, when they fill out the front end, they're going to click submit, and it's going to save to this email collection is kind of the objective. And so here's our HTML page that we're familiar with, that we've seen. And I thought I'd right off the bat, let's make this Bootstrap, because of course everything we've been doing is Bootstrap. So I copied in a Bootstrap template, and this will say something like pet. This is my pet adoption email registration page. We're going to delete the hello world, and we'll say div with the class of container. Maybe a header, a body, and a footer. A header and main. And then the header, a little simple, please provide your email address. Okay, so we need a form tag. Now, kind of Control Z here. Remember, there's a couple of options, I'm going to choose post. So my method is going to be posting to my server instead of doing a get. And remember I said the action attribute points at the server path that's going to handle this request. So where is this information being sent? Well, I set up a path with a little bit of logic in here that is at the path right here. This is my server path. You're going to notice it's a /API/email/new. Okay, now this is something that we kind of have been focusing on in third semester. So kind of I'll break down what's going on in here at a high level. We don't need to get into the weeds, but safe to say this is my path. I'm also going to, instead of making this a put, remember I just said this is going to be a post. So this is going to come in on a post, and it could be put or post, but I'm going to choose post because that's what I'm coding over here. And so I just need to basically put this path into my action. Now we need a submit button is what this is barking at me. And so I'll do button type of submit. And of course that's going to call the action in my form. Of course, we need maybe some classes here for some Bootstrap of button large, and we'll give it a color of button success. And let's go ahead and have a label and an input type of text. Now remember, the name is going to be used on the JavaScript on my server side, and the ID is used in the CSS. And we might choose to position this in a grid so that we can control our layout a little bit, and that's all good. Let's say email address, and this is a Bootstrap class of form label. And let's add a Bootstrap class of form input. So we add some Bootstrap classes to our controls. And this input will be text, email, and text email. So now that txt email is important to my JavaScript. So I'm going to kind of go back into my JavaScript. And now this is kind of where I'm reading what comes through in the request object this is referred to. So this dot email is now txt email. Okay, so you can kind of see by changing the front end name, it's also going to change how you read that on the middle tier, if you will, in the application tier. Okay, so we've got a form. This form has a label. That label's associated with a text box. So the label for, this for attribute, is how we tie it into this control. So this needs to say text email. And to kind of glance at this is what it looks like right now. Pretty simple form. What's happening then on the back end, and I'm probably going to have to troubleshoot. You know, this isn't going to work perfectly. I wouldn't suspect on the first time. It never does. You're a human being. I'm a human being. We all, we don't write perfect code. So probably there's a lot of code here. Something's probably breaking. But this is, again, this email.js. This is basically saying, okay, we got a post coming back from our front end. The data's coming in this request object. Let's basically read this request object and put together a JavaScript object called email. So this line 13 is creating this email object. And then we do a little validation and we say, hey, make sure that that's in there. Like if there's not an email address, let's give the user back an error. Right? So this is some data validation on the application tier. Like typically you do data validation on the front end and we do data validation in the middle tier. So it's like double validation. So that's good. We're doing data validation. And then here, this is doing like an insert command. This DB module insert one email, passing it the email object that we created, and then we send back a little success message saying email created. To kind of look at our database, insert one email connects to our database and runs, this needs to change. This is emails. It says, hey, on our emails collection, insert one email. And so you could see the data is kind of just being thrown around from one place to another, but it's keeping all the logic from the database separated from the logic from the application, separated from the logic of the front end. And so you can see there's quite a bit going on. Don't worry about that as much. Let's find what's broken, because very rarely does this all work on the first time. For whatever reason, I got mark@facebook.com. We click submit, and we get error page not found. Now, let me do a little bit of troubleshooting here. And so I forgot to register my route. And so, again, this is just kind of something on the back end where we have to define our routes in another file, server.js. So I needed to add this require current directory routes / API / email require. And in order to do that, okay. Now we got our server back up and running. So two little quirks. The first one was, and not that it matters for the purpose of this, but let's go ahead and register the route. And we're going to do so using this app.use. And then I forgot to export my router on the email.js. So kind of down here, forgot that line. So that's all up and running. So kind of going back to my page, let's launch the home page. And let's provide mark@Facebook. And there we go. It says email created. And so how we could handle this and maybe a little bit better syntax than just, message email created. Obviously, your end user might expect a little more friendly of a success page. But let's kind of go into our database, pet adoption emails, and refresh and see if there it is. mark@facebook.com came into our database. So working example, yay, everything is good. The other thing that I wanted to tie in here that's a little bit more relevant to you guys, okay? Besides just saying, hey, this is what a middle tier and a back end might look like is data validation using Bootstrap. So this is actually something that I think is pretty cool, and I want to introduce it here to you guys once. I will have you doing this on your final projects, right? So on your final projects, you will have to do input validation with Bootstrap. Okay, so this is worth your attention because this is a chunk of your grade, a piece of your grade on your final projects. And so let's go to the Bootstrap docs. And we kind of saw under forms, there's a whole section for validation. And the Bootstrap validation is just a more modern validation than what you get out of the box, out of the browser by default. You can kind of see how it works. In our discussion the other day, we talked about how you can style your controls based on pseudo classes, this invalid and valid. So they style their controls based on the status of those controls, whether they're valid or invalid. And this pseudo class can be applied to inputs, selects, and text areas. And so you can kind of see, here's a pretty standard form. And if I go to submit form, this is what Bootstrap validation looks like. Of course, this looks a little bit nicer than what you get out of the box, out of the browser. And it also responds dynamically based on the user actually importing, typing, I should say. So if I choose my username, check it out. As soon as I start typing, I get instant feedback. I don't have to wait until they click the submit button to get feedback on what I'm typing, right? So that's kind of what you expect in 2022. You expect per keystroke, as soon as I start typing something here, I'm just getting feedback whether this is going to be accepted or not. Right? So it's just better out of the box, and it's really not overly complicated to do. Good morning. Someone's alarm's going off. It's a good thing that we're awake. So let's kind of take a look at what's going on. On our form, you're going to notice there's a form. There's two things going on here. There's a Bootstrap class of needs validation, and there's an HTML attribute called no validate. The HTML no validate says, hey, I don't want to use the default validation that I get out of the browser. Instead, we're going to use Bootstrap, right? So this no validate attribute is basically telling the browser, don't do your normal thing. I'm going to use Bootstrap validation instead. And in order to use Bootstrap validation, we need this class of needs validation. So I'm going to start by adding this no validate onto my form. This is just a Boolean attribute, no validate. And I'll add the Bootstrap class of form validation. Needs validation, not form validation. Needs validation. Okay. I have one email address that the next thing you need to do is you are still using the HTML required this is an attribute, right? So this is a Boolean attribute in HTML. You use that the same way, but instead this is saying use Bootstrap instead of the default. Yes, sir.
You got that on the label, not the input.
Aha, let's put that in the right place. Good catch. Thank you. So let's put that here. It's also, remember we learned autocomplete? And so since we have autocomplete, let's just kind of throw that in there. Okay, so now this is required. Now we have autocomplete turned on. Let's go back to the docs because there's just a couple more things. You're going to see here this little extra looks good, right? This is your custom messages, right? So if I delete that, you can notice it kind of just gives me a warning. Later on, you could see here, this is a form that uses kind of the default browser defaults. That's not what we're doing. You can see here, they don't have the no validate. That's why it's doing this. This is the browser default. And here's a custom error message though. You can notice on the first example, on this example, there's no error message here. There's just a red like problem. If you scroll down a little bit, you're gonna see these, which actually give error messages. So like, please provide a valid city. Now, how that's done are with these divs that follow the controls. And so here you can kind of see looks good is the positive message. There should be another div here for invalid feedback. So notice, please choose a username would be a class of invalid feedback. And so you could put, you could put both of these and give a success message or give an error message, depending on which is the case. So you got div class of valid feedback, and you have div class of invalid feedback. Okay, so we're going to add two divs after our email, one of valid feedback, one of invalid feedback. And based on what's happening, so here's our input type of email. Now these are both hidden by default. Div class of I believe it was invalid hyphen feedback. And now yeah, div class of invalid feedback. And I'm just going to say please fix. One more step though. The one more step for validation, there's a little script that you'll need to include. Let's find that script. There's our custom styles. Okay. So you can see this is an example JavaScript for disabling form submissions if there are invalid fields. So this little script says, hey, if there are invalid fields, don't submit the form. Obviously, if it's good, submit the form. If there are invalid fields, don't submit the form. So this is the other kind of little copy and paste job that you got to do to kind of complete the job. And so you should be able to just kind of take this and copy it. And I'm gonna just kind of go down here underneath my bootstrap.js. I'm gonna paste that in. Now why doesn't that work? We need to put it in a script tag. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put in a script tag here and close my script tag here, format it. Okay, and I'm just gonna kind of leave that, collapse that and just, assume it works out of the box as it has in the past. If it breaks, then it breaks. Okay. So we got valid feedback, invalid feedback, please fix. Or I'll say, please, this is your email address, right? Please provide your email address. And there's just a couple of steps. You got to know what classes to add. You got to add this no validate attribute, and you have to add this little script that prevents form submission in the event of invalid data. Okay, and let's see what breaks. Okay. I didn't get interestingly enough, there's probably something I'm missing on the text box, but you're going to notice it did do validation, and it did do Bootstrap validation. I got my error message, and as soon as I start typing, it says looks good. If I click my email address, now it's actually pulling from my browser settings. It remembers my autocomplete from my browser. And so it's good, it's working, email created. It is working. I do want to fix that little bug, and I'm pretty sure it's just a Bootstrap class that we need to add. If I go back to my database and I refresh, I got mark@facebook.com, and I should now have Evan Gudmestead at Gmail. So this is all good. We do have our validation working. Let's double check the Bootstrap docs and see what I'm missing. Again, I'm pretty sure I know what it is, but the docs will tell me for certain. Get Bootstrap. Validation. What I was looking for are these little, these are background images. The check mark and the warning symbol, those are just background images. And it also highlighted the control, red and green. And that's all that I'm missing. Now it's interesting, it's not jumping out at me. Form control, form label, form control. Now I will point out, and this could be what's the problem. They are using the grid system. Notice your form is also a row. All of your controls are in columns. And so it very well could be that my form is not using the grid system that's causing this little quirk. I want to look at their other examples and see that is the case there, that is the case there. So you imagine if their selectors, if their CSS is selecting the input tag inside of a form that's in a grid, depending on how they're selecting in their CSS, that could be exactly why this is breaking. Because I don't really see, now here, this is saying server side. We recommend using client, so we don't want to, I'm not going to look at server side validation right now. I'm not looking at browser defaults. I just want to look at this. These are just their IDs, their form control, type of text, form label required. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and put my little grid in here. And so my form, I'll say is a row, form class of row. And then I'll do call medium 4, and notice really there's not too much else going on. So my form is going to have a class of row as well. And then I'll implement the grid with a div class of call. They did call medium -4, and I'm going to do 3 of them. And I'll just put all of my controls inside of the middle column. Format that and kind of leave the first columns just empty and the third column empty. And let's take a look. Okay, I'll troubleshoot that a little more. It is working with a quirk. I'm going to pause the recording. I'll troubleshoot it and fix it and then resume a little bit later. But you guys probably want to get to work today. So I'm going to pause the recording here and I'll come back once I've fixed the problem. I looked at it for 5 more seconds and I solved my problem. So I'm recording the ending of this video right now. My problem was as simple as having the correct classes on my controls. The class that I initially typed was form-input. That was incorrect. The correct class is form-control. When you have the correct Bootstrap classes on your controls, that solves your problem, makes everybody happy. Invalid, now we're getting the ugly red. As soon as I put the good email address, we get the happy green. Now I am noticing it's not even forcing the @gmail.com. We might need to learn to write regular expressions to fix that. However, problem solved in the short term. And I'll stop the video here.